This video is going to talk about making faces, and I just wanted to point out a couple of general things that most faces have in common. You have to decide what direction you're going to do the satin stitching. And years ago, in some of the original kits, the instructions would show little arrows, like this one for the nose on the snowman shows what direction you're supposed to do the satin stitching. But the general rule now, in the newer kits that don't tell you that, is basically to go up and down through the longest stretch of the embroidery area. So for this nose, I did it the length here, the same with the Tin Man. Now the Tin Man and the Lion had different color noses in the kit, and I decided to change the color. They both had orange noses in the kit, and I just decided that didn't work for me. So these are your kits, and I encourage you to change things up. Also, I wanted to point out this Tin Man has some blush, real makeup blush that I added to him. They do talk about that in the kits, and I'll show how to do that in a little bit. Working on the straw man face, I wanted to show you the outline stitch that I'm doing for the mouth. I've got one strand of red, and since this is just a straight line, I'm going to do 2 passes across there instead of having 2 at once, because I want to do this mouth with 1 thread. I want to do my outline stitch with 1 thread, even though the pattern on faces usually calls for double thread. And that's because I find with the outline stitch that 2 threads is just a little heavier than I like. The 1 thread covers the stamping ink just fine. Notice I've kept the felt around my face to give me just a little more to hold on to while I'm working. If I had cut this out perfectly, which sometimes you have to because the thread, the embroidery runs off the side of a face somewhere, but this one doesn't. Okay. So I usually do the outline stitch areas first. I want to save all the satin stitching for the very last on this piece, because you want to handle it as little as possible once you have the satin stitch on. You just don't want to catch any of those long running strands on anything. So I save satin stitching for last when there are other stitches in the piece. Okay, we will start the cheeks now. I'm going to start the circles for the cheeks, and I think circles are probably the most challenging on the face structure because you want to have a nice circle when you're done. Now you want to make sure I'm using 2 strands of thread here. That's generally what you use for satin stitches. I start in the middle. I'm going to work my way out. I find that is the best way for me to get a nice round circle. That's usually how I tackle these. I decide I decide what direction I want my satin stitching to run, where my up and down is. I try and do my up and down the longest length of the design area. And I'm just trying to get just on the outside of that stamped line each time so that it's covered. And thankfully this brown stamped line with this light pink floss color works well together. If I had a black stamped area, I might want to kind of rough up that ink stamp with the edge of my needle like I've shown before. I'll just rub it on there to loosen it up. I'll do something like that. Hope you could see that. The light's tough on this lighter felt to show you. Try to play with my light, and I, even though, you know, it looks pretty nice and round there, I continue to stitch on that edge because it will just add a nice bit of fullness there as you go around. You know, the stitch is really lying under there, but you can see how it pulls. I hope you can see how that really helps round out that edge to try, and even though you can't see that actual stitch, it just helps pull the fabric as the thread pulls on that circle shape to help with your overall roundness. Now I think one of these, that one's a little bit, oops, I really pulled that. Let's see how it just doesn't quite lie there as nice as it should with the others. Trying to be real careful that I don't grab, and it's the one I started on that side, so I'm just going to pull it out and restart that. I have been known to get all the way done and just not like what I did and rip out what I did and start again. And the best way to rip out, if you're going to rip out the whole thing, is to just cut right through the top of the thread carefully and pull it all out through the back side. You're going to have, there's just no way to really save that thread and reuse it. The thread really gets worn as it pulls through the eye of the needle, through the fabric, so it's best to just start with new thread in a situation like that if you really don't like the way that turned out. So you can see as I pull on it on the back side, and I kind of use my finger here to create a little pressing edge, and I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to tie off, and we'll start a new knot on the other side. And I'll come back and show you that. I got done sewing this second cheek over here, and I just decided I really don't like how it came out. So I wanted to show you how I would go about ripping it out in an instant like this. I'd cut from the front and just start all over again. I'm going to work on the nose for the scarecrow, and it's a nice triangle, and with a circle, triangle, whatever, I usually start right in the middle and work my way through both sides. And I'm going to try and keep my hands in front of the camera here. I've got 2 strands of thread, and I'm just on the outside of the stamped line. Triangles aren't quite as hard as circles. Circles are really the toughest ones. Those are really tough to have come out equal on both sides, nice and round. So if you got circles to make, good luck. They're my least favorite. Other shapes are much easier. Now I also changed the color of the stocking, or the scarecrow's nose in the ornament kit and the stocking kit. He has an orange nose, and that just was too bright for me. So I'm going to try a little brown nose. And I'm just trying to make sure every time my floss is nice and flat, the two pieces are not twisted. Oh, that one's already way off to the side. Come back here, just pull those two threads up. And since I was off quite a bit, they were by themselves and easy to pull out without grabbing any of the other threads. You got to be careful when you're ripping out in the satin stitch on the back side in case you grab. It's really easy to grab more than the two that you need, or whatever you happen to be working with. And okay, I just want to make sure. Sometimes you also, and that may be what happened here, when you're pulling the thread through, you wind up actually stitching through your thread. And let me just see if I did that. And I might have done that. I think, no, okay. Just wanted to make sure, because that does happen, and then you do have to try and pull that single thread that you stitched through. Oops, got some fuzz there. Back through. This nose came out a little different, but it works. Got some more fuzz in there. There we go. And that's good. We'll do the eyes next. Hope you can see that. Okay, I'm going to make the eyes for the scarecrow. And these are simply black ovals. And they will have a little eye highlight of a French knot in white floss with one strand of thread. Now, for some reason, the ornaments had a more elaborate eye than the stocking version of the scarecrow, and guess what? I'm going with the easier one on. That's just like making sure my threads are flat and next to each other, not twisted. Anyway, I'm going with the easier version. I like it. And you already know I'm not a big fan. I'm doing my last stitch here in the side. Even though you really won't see those threads, they just help add a roundness to the other threads by completing it. So I do it. I'm doing my darndest to make these circles and ovals look even. That's making me happy. So I'll do a little knot on the back side. Okay. Now, let me show the finer points of, you kind of have to decide where you want the highlight. In this case, they were right at the top of the eye. Sometimes they're at the bottom. Oops. I got a second knot in there. I'll live with that. Now, oops, I'm just going to do one wrap on these. Almost did that wrong. Hope you can see that. And because I might not like where it comes out on the second one, I don't want the first one, I'm going to actually re-knot and start the second one. Your fingernails become nice little pressing tools. In case you haven't noticed, I do that quite a bit. Just use my nails to really give a nice little press to it. I want to try and make it as much like the placement of the last one. I can kind of preview it before I pull it all the way through. And there we go. That turned out pretty nicely. I'm going to add blush to Dorothy's cheeks. And thank goodness we don't have to do the satin stitch to put them on. We're going to use regular makeup blush, a dry powder blush. I have a simple little makeup brush, and I pounced a little piece off here. You might want to, I like to do that, practice on an edge. Get a feel for how it loads on your brush, how to work on the piece. And it's kind of like stenciling. It reminds me of stenciling. You just push. Push. It's a real soft push. And that's pretty much all there is to it. You could use a stencil brush if you have one, a small stencil brush for painting. You could use paint. I have done that before. Again, I'm going to brush off a little there. And just pounce it. A lot like if you've ever stenciled before. It's a lot like stenciling.